Race fans, it's time to buckle in and listen to the fastest hour in racing radio. Your driver is a multi-time NASCAR winner and Hall of Famer Mark Martin. We cover racing, grassroots, history, we bench race, we talk life, and most importantly, we smash the loud pedal. It's time to turn some laps on the Mark Martin Podcast.
Episode number 27 of the Mark Martin Podcast, and we're going to go into year 1986. A return to NASCAR and short track racing. But before that, again, make sure to hit markmartinpod.com on your internet browser, markmartinpod.com, and find all of the listen links. Go back and listen to some of the older episodes, and make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player. Available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, and many more. MarkMartinPod.com. But Mark, the year 1986, let's roll right into that year and tell us all about it.
Well, 86 was obviously my second year with Gunderman and working with the Finnigs, Jimmy and Jeffrey, and a fabulous team there with a nice sponsorship from Miller Brewing Company. We're right there in Milwaukee. We're sharing a shop with Kawicki, not really sharing it because there was a wall between us. It was the same shop, it was just divided down the middle. So, it was interesting to have our competition right next to us. Pretty heated competition, by the way. Alan would have loved to have been driving for Jerry. Who wouldn't? Jerry had a first-class organization, was a fun guy, and what more can you say about Jimmy Finnig? So, as I said, we the end of '85, we were building a cup car. Jerry wanted for fun just dab his toe into half a dozen races. And of course, we were going to continue our ASA Championship endeavor and try to win that thing, and all the other short tracks that we could run, and high profile crown jewel type events. And so obviously we were racing Fords. Robert Yates had just recently switched from building Chevrolets to building Fords. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe 86 was his first year campaigning the 28 car with a Ford engine, if I remember correctly. I know that obviously we wanted the best. Robert Yates at that time was the best engine builder that we could do business with. So we made a deal with Robert for engines for the Cup car. Continued prototype, obviously, for our short track stuff, ASA stuff, and we built a banjo car. Went to Robert G's, had Robert work with Robert G, hanging the body and finishing it off. Took that baby to Daytona, and it was slow, and it seemed like we blew up my motor every other time out on the racetrack. We had tremendous amounts of engine trouble, and the car was just dog slow at Daytona. And the Daytona 500 was our focus for February. So we weren't doing anything at New Smyrna or anything. So we go down there we went and tested and was slow as hell and blew up like crazy. And then went down for the race, and we were slow as hell. And we qualified 44th, which wasn't going to be good enough to get us in the race. And back then, after qualifying on Sunday, you could re-qualify on Monday and Tuesday, and I think even Wednesday, but at least Monday and Tuesday, you could throw out your time and go run again to try to improve your time. And based on my experience, I chose to not rerun, just take that time and focus on the the 125-mile qualifying races that were coming up on Thursday, because I knew we could race our way in, and I wanted to work with the car in race setup on those days, Monday and Tuesday, Wednesday, get ready to race our way in. I was confident we could race our way in, and we did race our way in to the 500 in the qualifying races. So that got us in to the 500, and I'm sure we blew up in the race early. We weren't real competitive. We just for some reason we couldn't make speed. Now Robert's car made a good speed, but for some reason ours didn't, and I don't know. We had a nice 58-inch tread width car, so it was narrow, a nice narrow super speedway car, nice looking body on it. There was no obvious reason why we couldn't make speed, but we didn't. Anyway, that was our Daytona 500. We had planned to run Atlanta. That fit with our schedule. So we went back home and worked on the car to get it ready for Atlanta. And so we went to Atlanta, and when we checked in, we did get a garage. A lot of times you had to park outside, but they had enough garages to put us in a garage area. But we were so far down on the totem pole, Goodyear starts mounting tires by points, and they go down through the points, probably last year's points, and they go down through the points and mount everybody a set of tires, and then they mount everybody a second set of tires, and mount everybody third set of tires. We finally got a set of tires as practice was beginning. So I only had that one set of tires for our practice. We had one practice before qualifying. And of course, I had to stay on those tires the whole time. Didn't have a second set. Never got a second set to us during practice. So when practice was over, we finally got our second set of tires. And as I explained to you before, I was our tire guy. I always liked doing my own tires because I didn't have anybody accessible to me that was better at it than I was. So, I had been doing it for years and was one of the better ones, guys around in the garage with tires. So anyway, started trying to, match up the stagger, and I had my car dialed for 1 1/4 inch rear stagger, and nothing I could do to get more than 3/4 inch. I switched the tires around, the left front and the left rear, took the biggest right side tire and put on the rear, took the smallest left side tire, put on the rear, and, did what I could, and still only had 3/4 inch. So we rolled her out to qualify, and I sail around there pretty damn fast. Coming up off of 4, I start crawling up the hill tight, pushing up off of 4, and we wound up on the outside pole. So that was pretty incredible for a team out of Wisconsin. But we picked up some sponsorship. Miller throwed in an extra $1,000 or something to put their decal on the hood. That was pretty cool. But there again, I don't feel like we ran that great in the race. Not nearly like we qualified. Was really difficult to be an outsider and do a one-off race and be able to come and compete against Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough and Darrell Waltrip and Dale Earnhardt and all those guys. But we represented ourselves well anyway with speed and had a good race. And the only other, there are 2 more races. Then we go to Talladega. And at Talladega, you don't have the opportunity to race your way in. And that slow pig didn't make the show. So my cousins always went there and camped, and family and stuff. So the guys went home, loaded up, went home. We missed the race, and they went home. I stayed because I wanted to hang out with my family and cousins and all relatives, and so I hung out with them. And they had an extra grandstand ticket, and so it was right in the tri-oval. And I'd never been, although I hadn't been in the grandstands for a race like that since '75, I guess. So it'd been 11 years, and since before I was a NASCAR driver for sure. And so I remember the cars coming down the front straightaway to take the green flag. And when they got the green flag and you heard them step on the gas and those things started roaring toward you, and I just remember cold chill bumps all over, like it was unbelievable. And I've been doing it for a few years, but it's a whole different sensation being in the car and being in the trial, watching those babies roar towards you the first time. It was absolutely an incredible experience. I had cold chills. So I do remember that. And then we went to Riverside at the end of the year because I had always run top 10 out there at Riverside with my own ragtag team. I really ran good there. So we went out there and we ran good. Especially for who we were, and what we were. Now you got to remember that was my Daytona car, so super speedway car. So it probably wasn't optimum for Atlanta, but now for Riverside, I did widen the tread width out on it, and whatnot. I remember, I think we moved the lower control arms out, a bit longer upper control arms, got a wider rear end housing and whatnot, and widened it out. So, but it still wasn't, Jesus, it was a super speedway car, but we ran good out there. And then that wrapped up the NASCAR stuff. And the ASA thing went really well. We had won 4 years the year before, races the year before, and I think 5 or 6 poles, but we hadn't been consistent enough to win the championship. So with a year under our belt with these particular cars, had the bodies like I wanted them, the aero balance like I wanted them, the setups really figured out. We were on our money. So we won 5 races, and I think 7 poles, if I remember correctly, and won the championship, which was a big deal because if you take into consideration that 19 years old, I started a string of 3 ASA championships in a row, which flipped out everybody and then went NASCAR racing and failed miserably. And then when I had to pick my career back up and start all over from scratch, I didn't get to start from scratch as a ASA champ on the deal on everything. It was like very few deals, if any, and had to start from ground level. So that was in '84 back at Rivals. Built the first year foundation in '85. Got with Gunderman and Jimmy, and we made a serious run at it. Came up a little short, and then in '86 we did it again. So I'd made it back to the top of the heap in my career. So it was a very gratifying feeling. But at the same time as this was, all transpiring toward the latter part of the season, Bobby Allison had a a good relationship with all of us. Jerry Gunderman, of course, the owner, and Jimmy Finnig, because Jimmy was there, and because Bobby drove all of his ASA and short track late model racing was handled by us there, running his number 22 Miller High Life car there. So ran out of our shop and our guys, and heck, I even helped Jimmy and Jeffrey work on his car as well, preparing it and all. Well, Bobby had really developed a good relationship with Jimmy and had been on Jimmy to move to Charlotte and be his Cup crew chief. And Jimmy, if you know Jimmy Finnig, most of you don't, but if you knew Jimmy Finnig, you would know that Jimmy Finnig is terribly loyal to a fault. He's so loyal, he won't. He's unbelievable loyal. And Jimmy, well, let me say, at the same time, I was beginning to get some offers to come back NASCAR racing. And the most intriguing offer was my ex-brother-in-law, I'm sorry, David Levendahl, who I talk about a lot, came to work for me in 1979, moved with me. He was driving a truck for my dad, moved, I hit him up to come work for me. So I moved him when I moved from Batesville, Arkansas to North Liberty, and he's the one that named me Prick of Misery. First it was Misery, then it was Prick of Misery, and then the little hemorrhoid. So if that gives you any idea of what it was like to work with me back then, I worked very hard, and I expected everyone else to work at least nearly as hard. So anyway, David had a brother-in-law who he had talked into running a Busch Series car, now known as Xfinity, and was hitting me up to come drive that car. And I was in a good situation with Gunderman. I got paid fair. I made a livable living. There wasn't anything extra left over, for sure. When you consider, it would have been pretty awesome as a bachelor, but with a a family of my size with 4 little girls, and all, I needed to make more money. I mean, I seriously did. We could live on what we had and what we made, but we weren't able to do a lot of extra things that we might have liked to do. So I was interested in this Busch Series deal with Levendahl, and because I had told him that I would consider it if I could get a salary plus a percentage of the winning. Small salary, but still I worked humongous hours in the shop, and I wanted to get a salary for that plus a percentage of the winnings. Whereas at Gunderman's and everywhere else, at Gunderman's and Ribals, all I got was a percentage of the winnings, and I worked humongous hours in the shop. So it looked like this deal was going to be a better deal for me, and it got me back into NASCAR, and it got me in a situation where I could provide better for my family. And so Jimmy had his offer going on. I had mine. I sat down and talked with Jimmy about it. And Jimmy said, well, I've got this opportunity to go do this for Bobby Allison. But he says, I'm not going. I'm not going if you stay. I won't, And I'm like, Jimmy, you have to do this. You have to do this. And if you're going to do that, I'm going to go do this. So we made a deal that we were going to go do that. So he went, and crew chief Bobby Allison for 1987, and subsequently, not long after that, won a Daytona 500. So I think Jimmy Finnig's got 3 of those to his credit now. And he's a Hall of Famer uh, crew chief. But our paths will cross again in the future, and that's going to be interesting when we get back to that. But that'll be a little further down the line. And I made plans to pick up and move my sweet little girls and wife again, but this time to a better, better climate, I would say. So those were that's kind of the details of it. So Jimmy and I moved to North Carolina. I made the move to the Greensboro area. Got an apartment in Greensboro, and we moved in there because the shop, $11 shop, was in Randleman, North Carolina. Wasn't that far from Greensboro, 20-30 minute drive. And boy, is it going to be fun to talk about 1987. The next podcast is really going to be fun because if I think about working hard, and I worked brutally hard through these years, like hard enough to kill most people. I can't think of a single year that I ever worked as hard as this upcoming 1987. It's going to be fun to talk about, guys. I really look forward to it.
So let's talk about Gunderman. Just that 1 year in NASCAR. Now, a Wisconsin legend, been around forever. How was your relationship after that year, after you guys, after 86, after you went your separate ways?
Jerry didn't take it hard. I don't think we had a contract. We didn't have a contract because if you remember my story from 1984, from 1983, I got bit in the ass for not having a contract. So I had one in 1984 and got bit in the ass because I had one. So I was back to not wanting one unless I had to have it. And so we just had an agreement, Jerry and I. It was kind of year to year. And Jerry was a good man. He didn't want to hold. He never expressed, "Oh, please don't do this," or whatever. He was supportive. Jerry's a really good man. I think he was probably genuinely happy for me, but extremely happy for Jimmy Fittig. Nobody goes from being an ASA crew chief out of Wisconsin to a NASCAR Cup championship driver crew chief. Nobody does that. I can't think of that ever happening other than Jimmy. So anyway, yeah, it was good. Jerry was he was a good man to work with. No problems. We're still friends. Always have been friends. It was good. A good relationship.
So let's talk about that 1986 season and going back to NASCAR. How did you feel going back to NASCAR after the fallout a couple of years earlier?
Well, I had a sort of chip on my shoulder toward NASCAR when I left, but I really wasn't going cup racing. I was going, there were fewer companion races back then in the mid '80s than there are today, and it was, it had more of its own identity, and you had greats like Tommy Ellis and Tommy Houston and Sam Lard, that were full-time guys in there. Mike Alexander was there from sort of my circles, my southern circles, late model, background. It had its own identity, and I embraced it. It was going to be quite a challenge because I was a Ford guy. And it's sort of for next, the next podcast to get into the details of the cars and building the cars. But it was going to be an incredible challenge for me because I had not raced any of those races to speak of. And so it was a lot of racetracks I'd never been to and a lot of competition that I didn't know a lot about and a different world. But, that never slowed me down.
Tell us how a kid from Batesville, Arkansas, a dirt track kid, why did you like road courses so much?
Because in Arkansas, I grew up on driving back road dirt roads, dirt and gravel roads with one-lane bridges. The little bridges over the creeks were one lane wide. And the idea that, what was so much fun in all those back roads was to drive as fast as you could go and stay out of the ditch. That's all road course racing is, dude.
So you're basically a rally car driver.
I guess. Road course, it's a lot the same. Rally car driving and road course racing isn't that much different, really, to be honest with you. The whole concept is to go as fast as you can go and stay out of the ditch or on the racetrack. I have no idea. I just hauled ass the first time I went to Riverside for my first road course. And that was a very unique road course, and I loved it. And first impressions probably mean a lot. I loved it. It was an exciting, really, really fun race. First time I went out to Riverside, and I hauled ass every time I went to Riverside based on the equipment that I was in. And so it was just, I don't know. It was just a natural for me.
So tell us about Miller Lite sponsorship on that car, black car in 1986. How cool was that car?
Well, that car, that was the Cup car, and it was not sponsored by them. It was sponsored mostly by Jerry Gunderman and G&G Trucking. We had another trucking company locally that put their name on it one time, and this, that, and the other. But when we sat on the outside pole at Atlanta, we contacted Miller. Probably Eddie Gossage was still there at Miller, because I worked with Eddie Gossage. He worked at Miller in Milwaukee at the time. And we probably reached out to Eddie and hit him up, and they coughed up a little change to put it on the hood. So just for that one race. So that was really the extent of that.
Now, speaking of Eddie Gossage, he was on Twitter the other day. He's listening to these podcasts. Now, to give fans an update, they probably know, but he's at Texas Motor Speedway.
Yeah, he's the president of the Speedway at Texas Motor Speedway. But at the time, he was working in the motorsports department with Miller Brewing Company. And so, they were very active with Bobby Allison and Cup and probably Danny Sullivan in IndyCar and many others. They were pretty active in motorsports, and it was truly an honor to have Miller on my ASA car. That was really, really high profile, rather than having your local cheeseburger joint, or local garage, for a sponsor. I mean, we had a very, very first class deal with a very high profile sponsor that did a few really cool promotions around our deal. It was a high profile outfit in 80, 85 and 86 with the beautiful number 2 Miller High Life Thunderbirds.
So to give race fans a preview of the next podcast, 1987, a very transitional year, a bunch of different race cars. Give us just kind of a synopsis of what we're going to see in 1987.
What you're going to see in 87 is me running the full Busch Series, which would be Xfinity now, basically with 2 race cars. We didn't get our deal made until we really didn't start building race cars until after the first of the year. We had to build 2 race cars. There was me, David Lovendahl, and one other employee. Bobby Leslie is the one. I think we may have had a couple of different guys in or out, but Bobby Leslie is the one that I remember, but Bobby may have been, I can't remember now if it was Danny Ryan or Bobby Leslie. I know that we had a lot of volunteer help because Petty Enterprises was right down the road, just a few miles. So it was 3 guys full time starting in January, building a brand new team with nothing. We started with nothing but DL's tools and a truck and trailer. And I'm talking about a cube van and an open trailer. That's all we had New Year's Day. And so we had to get on it and build a speedway car for Daytona and get ready to go to Daytona and be ready to go to Richmond the very next weekend with a short track car. These were Fords. I was a Ford guy. I brought a little bit of help, support from Ford to this thing. There was one problem. They raced V6s in that series at this time. And Ford didn't have a V6 ready to race. So I had to race a V8. And I had to carry an extra 100 pounds because of that. And most places that really made a terrible difference. 100 pounds was a hell of a lot. And the weight of the engine really hurt the car, hurt the handling of the car. So we were going into this thing extremely challenged. And that is sort of the outlook of the season. We'll pick up in January when we start the next pod.
So that is it for 1986, episode 27 of the Mark Martin Podcast. Again, make sure to hit markmartinpod.com. Get all of your listen links. Make sure to subscribe and give us that 5-star rating.
Thank you for subscribing and listening to the Mark Martin Podcast. Remember to give us a 5-star rating in your app store. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Mark Martin POD. The Mark Martin Podcast is a production of the Accelerated Podcast Network.